welcome to the first Sunday Arts program in October. October, of course, means 8, and it's the 10th month. Hello, I'm Catherine Ashari. Add 8 and 10 together, and you have our 18th program in the series. Today it's also konnichiwa, hello in English, to Malcolm McNeil, who's been singing ballads to vast audiences in Japan.
Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the berry on the vine.
Then to inspire us from the wireless, talkback host and poet Mike Minahan.
Inside every woman is someone's little girl gone bad or mad.
And finally, a blow-by-blow account from the noisiest section of the orchestra. But first it's to Japan with Malcolm McNeil. This week, Malcolm McNeil and Dame Kiri Takanawa are releasing a duet album. The title, Heart to Heart, comes from a song Malcolm McNeil wrote, which Dame Kiri loved. But Malcolm's also written several other songs. The one the Japanese fell in love with was Melissa. It's largely because of Melissa that Malcolm McNeil's been invited back 3 times to sing in Japan.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Malcolm McNeil from New Zealand. Nice meeting you.
Nice to be here.
Can you give us a message to the Pan Pacific
I'd
Music Festival?
love to give a message to the Pan Pacific Festival.
Tokyo
Tokyo ni kolarete oreshiku omoimasu.
ではお願いいたします。
Lady loves me in the morning, comes to me so soft and warm, and then she covers me with kisses numerous. Honeybee, she's so mellifluous, Melissa.
Written by Malcolm, Melissa was released in Japan in 1989, gaining an instant rapport with the Japanese. But it was a New Zealander, Peter Buckley, who saw the potential.
Firstly, he's a very consummate professional performer. But in his recordings and also with his own personality, there's a soft, gentle side of Malcolm, which appeals to a certain part of the psyche of the people in Japan. And I just felt that the combination of how good he is as a performer, coupled with his own distinctive style of delivery, would appeal to a particular market in Japan, and particularly on the jazz side, which, as it turned out, was quite correct.
I wasn't that surprised when the Japanese picked up on it. I was delighted, but it seemed natural, a natural process, because I think the Japanese do value refinement. New Zealand finds it very hard to value refinement. It's awkward for them. We're a race of rugby players, and we like to knock our beer back, basically. And so I've been a kind of an awkward fish there for many years. In a way, it was lovely for me to find this outlet. And I felt very comfortable. When I first came here and did a concert, it was in one sense like coming home. I mean, part of me, to have the level of acceptance I've enjoyed here, has been great, a wonderful confidence builder. Fantastic.
On this, Malcolm's 3rd visit, he undertook a 6-city tour performing 7 concerts. He's part of an international bill which includes from Malaysia, Noor Kamalasari, Kahu Shimada from Japan, and from the United States, Sarita. As the tour begins in Tokyo, the performers are introduced to the press through their music.
Lady loves me in the evenings when the sun bows low to leave a golden glow across the sky above me. I know why, 'cause she loves me, Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the honey in the honey jar. Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the berry on the vine.
The tour, titled Meet a Nice Vocal, was last year's Pan Pacific Music Festival. The festival is organised annually by a Buddhist-based Japanese organisation, Minon. Similar festivals have been held since 1964, aimed at promoting peace between nations through music. Pianist Michael Houston is the only other New Zealander to have been invited by Minon back in 1982.
Thank you very much for coming, indeed.
I like the clarity with which they do their dealings. It's honourable and seem to be honourable. And even if it is just the face that one gets in the dealings, then the face is very pleasant indeed, and it's not aggressive. It's clear. All the money that you're paid comes wrapped in a little paper bow, fresh new notes. It's done very forthrightly, and I find that I've got a lot to learn from that. It's out front.
There's a learning curve for his Japanese hosts as well. Malcolm's a jazz singer, and as such he needs to retain a certain amount of flexibility, improvisation if you like.
Later on, you have 4 others.
4 others, okay. My Funny Valentine will be one other song. And Straighten Up and Fly Right. They're great sticklers for precise time. And that's fair enough, really, but I don't necessarily work quite like that, which they find fairly difficult to understand. So largely I agree to everything. And on the night, it, of course, will be different because that's the nature of the beast. I guess what I've got to remember is just to keep my own spontaneity and not be crowded by the pressure of the organisation. I've deliberately kept the scale of my own performance light and small because I didn't want to be swept along in the machine that increasingly goes for larger and larger production. That's not something I feel particularly comfortable in.
Malcolm does feel comfortable in the large metropolis of Tokyo, confident in the knowledge that when the work's done, he'll soon be back in Christchurch. When he returned from Britain at the end of the 70s, he made a career decision to live in New Zealand, but still work internationally.
Actually have to go overseas to prove they're worthwhile. I find if I go outside the country, you're only good in a way if you're not here, you've just returned, or you're leaving. But if you're in New Zealand, aren't things going so well? It's a curious attitude, and it's one we've had for a long, long time, and I don't think we're in any danger of losing it quickly.
Malcolm's only specialist support is Sydney guitarist George Gola. Neither seems to have a language problem when it comes to music.
Yes, good. Yes, okay. So straighten up and fly right first, okay. No, you say.
Oh, you can't?
Yeah, will you
Do you want me to count?
Yeah,
Okay.
like it if you would.
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
just move it a bit.
I'll play
Yeah.
arpeggio,
Yeah.
something.
Malcolm's inroad into the large Japanese music industry is still at the specialist niche market end. There's a long way to go before he can be confident of an established place. But the beginnings are there, with the strong support of a kindred spirit.
It is a market that, particularly on the jazz side, that is not too fickle. If you are able to establish yourself and then through some regular basis make yourself available to come back to Japan, it would continue to be, for Malcolm, quite a worthwhile part of his overall work schedule around the world. And I can see that in the future he would probably receive more invitations to come back for special concerts, whether it's jazz festivals or whether it's Malcolm McNeil concerts on their own.
If you do it long enough and do it in the same place, eventually you'll make a mark. And I think now, after 25 years, people realise that I'm serious about what I do and that I'm not going to go away in a hurry and that I'll keep doing it, and I'll do it to the best of my ability in the way I know best. Lady loves me in the daytime, teaches me new games to play when I'm enchanted by her magic potion, rubs my belly with suntan lotion. Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the honey in a honey jar. Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the berry on the vine. George. Lady loves me in the evening when the sun bows low to leave a golden glow across the sky above me. I know why, 'cause she loves me. Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the honey in the honey jar. Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the berry on the vine. Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the honey in the honey jar. Melissa, your kisses are sweeter than the berry on the vine. I love the honey from the vine. I love that honey. I love the honey when it drips. Oh,
Malcolm McNeil, the international crooner, and Dame Kiri's choice for her first duet album, Heart to Heart, being released this coming Tuesday. And on Sunday, November the 3rd, a documentary called The Magic of Two screens on Television 1. It's an intimate look at the close relationship established between Malcolm McNeil and Dame Kiri while they were recording Heart to Heart. Still to come, we're instrumental in bringing you a blast from the brass. You'd have to be pretty churlish to accuse Radio Talkback host Mike Minahan of blowing her own trumpet. Her book of poems, Embracing the Dark, evokes the terrors of innocence as childhood memories are reinvested with the unwanted wisdom of adulthood. Mike Minahan's poetry sings of the humdrummery of house life, and the result, according to the Dust Jacket, is a work about those we call crazy, about mythology and salvation.
Inside every woman is someone's little girl gone bad or mad. This is what she told me, and I believe it to be a truth. And inside every woman is a scribe wanting to set the record straight.
Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Mike Minahan. Welcome to Night Talk on 3ZB. It's Friday, the night we wind down a bit after the week's activities and dramas.
Radio Talkback host Mike Minahan, born Michelle Williams, is also a poet who's been writing all her life. But it's only recently that she's taken her work seriously enough to have it published. While writing is a solitary occupation, radio has given Mike something that she's searched for all her life, a family.
Otherwise it's yucky.
Right, well, I'm going to try this on the weekend. I've got all my ingredients, bar the cake tin, which I'll go out and get tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, I've had a cake tin here for years, and everybody's been trying to nick it, but no way, Jose.
Right, good on you. Stand firm on that one. Denise, thanks so much.
And I've got some
It's a good
recipe for you.
feeling coming in at night and sitting down and knowing that you're reaching out. It does something for me. It gives me more probably than it gives them. It gives me a sense of belonging to something. For me, sitting behind a microphone, I have a sense of, it's unreal in a way. I never have that sense of the big wide audience out there. It's a very intimate thing for me. And writing is a very intimate thing. And I have to jolt myself sometimes to realise that it actually isn't, Mike. You know, I have to say to myself, what you're saying other people are listening to, what you're writing other people are reading. So I have difficulty with the reality aspect of it.
While Mike's talkback sessions are a cosy chat between friends, her poems are much more personal.
Little girls love their grandfathers, but grandfathers chase the butterfly skirts of little girls, offering plums instead of rings.
Mike was an only child, and her father left her mother when Mike was 3. When she was not at boarding school, she was with her grandparents.
Although I was an only child, I wouldn't say I was terribly lonely, but I certainly learned about being on one's own very early on and being without things that were important, like perhaps a mother and a father who weren't there. And to cope with it, to cope with that dreadful gut-wrenching feeling of driving to boarding school and seeing One Tree Hill get closer and closer and knowing that it was inevitable. I developed, I suppose, a trick of flipping into another world. I learned to be an actress very, very young and to cope. I suppose I've always felt lonely, as though I sort of didn't belong in some sense. And so one develops a character. One becomes someone else.
Michelle became Mike.
Michelle became Mike. She became all kinds of people, actually. There was a time when she was Kate. She's been Judith. She's been Judy. Yeah.
Different personas with each of the names?
To an extent, it's a psychiatrist's dream, I suppose. But I guess the trick is not losing control of it. People have always thought I had loads and loads of confidence. I don't. I'm actually quite shy. And I'm usually a nervous wreck before walking into a crowded room or going before people. But I was taught to walk tall, put your shoulders back, hold your head up high. And I used to just pretend that I was someone else or that I was going somewhere else. I was in control. I'd write a script for the occasion. And I still do that to a certain extent. You know, I'm sitting here looking as though I'm in control now. Actually, I'm a mess. Isn't it strange how you remember childhood? My mother tells me a lot of what I remember is fantasy and absolutely didn't take place at all. Now I remember a day and a man. The man is black and I am high on his shoulders. His brown shaven skull is hard between my legs. Look, they say, there she is, and so I am. I have a bird's eye view. I am queen of the mountain. I am streamers and balloons, china dogs and threepenny mirrors, jugglers and candy floss. Look. I am 8 feet tall, a colossus. I am as tall as a tower in the blue sky. I am the lady leaning out for ribbons. I sway in time to his big, dainty feet doing a fandango. He is a flamingo prancing. He is a peacock strutting. He flies, swoops, bends, and reaches for the sun. I feel the dance and the rippling of his black neck and shoulders. His head gleams like a shiny brown ball between my knees. I feel our sweat mingle like twin streams. My skirt clings about my waist like a bandage and warm, wet salt trickles down my legs. I am the fair girl, the daughter of a princess. I am the stilt walker, the trapeze flyer, a bird, a bloody wonder. I am the little girl astride the shoulders of a black giant at the PUNI fair in 1952.
The absence of Mike's father affected her profoundly.
It did. I suppose I fantasized about my father dreadfully. I knew he was a singer. and I knew he was overseas in exciting places like Austria and Italy and England. But I was also threatened with him. And my grandmother used to say to me, "You mark my words, young lady, you'll end up to be just like your father." And that was a dreadful threat. You know, it was the worst thing that I could possibly be was be like him. It worked two ways. Of course, what happened was I wanted to be like him. It was infinitely more exciting than being who I was and being like the people that I was surrounded with. Inevitably, I did do the things that he did, too. I travelled overseas. I wanted to be a singer. A lot of the characteristics that he had, I developed. The personality traits, the subsequent problems with relationships and things like that. It was almost like playing out his script at times.
Mike met another major influence, Catholicism, at her convent boarding school. She also discovered guilt.
I became completely indoctrinated. And when I left school at 15, it was inevitable that I converted to Catholicism. But it didn't help. I was steeped in guilt. And that's not a good thing, is it, really? I mean, that's a bad thing. Why do I hang on to Catholicism? Ask a Catholic, you know, I mean...
The theatricality of Catholicism also appealed, the stage being a powerful attraction.
That was the dream. I mean, I was going to go on the stage, whatever happened. I was far more interested in theatre than I was in school, for instance. You know, I used to go to school with the traces of makeup on, you know, and I used to wear a tuxedo, not a tuxedo, a waistcoat and the whole bit, you know, the regalia. Sister used to despair of me. And I had this thing that I was either going to be a famous... it was a singer at that stage. I was a dramatic soprano. And... the world was just waiting for me. I used to lie on my bed, you know, and just fantasize people interviewing me, just like this, you know, and what I would say. And I was reading the biography of Joan Sutherland at the time, you know, and I think, oh, God, you know, that's what I'm going to be. And so I did.
By the time she was 17, Mike was in San Francisco, studying with the San Francisco Opera. She was also married to a 45-year-old American.
A young girl, I lay in the arms of a man old enough to be my father, and he played me like a harp. He dressed me in fur and fine wool. He placed a diamond on my finger and signed a contract. And when I lay in his arms, I smelled smoke. As I lay loose in his arms, I smelled death. He slept on my breast heavy and spent and as old as sin. I thought how this was the world of daddies and old men, of fathers who ruled with the power rigid between their legs. These were the rule makers, the confessors, the king's men, the tyrants and the sometime Romeos. These were the husbands of mothers, the fathers of daughters in cahoots with sons. These were the priests and the note-takers, the stethoscope men, the lawyers. The world was a brotherhood of schemers, of men growing old in the arms of young girls. I didn't really mean it, guys. I didn't really mean it.
Mike's marriage, at 17, was one of many impetuous acts.
It just horrifies me to think about it.
Why so young?
Well, he asked me, well, he told me he was going to marry me. He was tremendously attractive. It was quite glamorous having a 45-year-old American sea captain sort of clap eyes on you and say, I'm going to marry you. And we got married within weeks of meeting. I think the family was slightly concerned. We've yet really to talk that through. But I did, and went to the States. I was in the States, and I was a mother a year later.
But the white knight who had carried her off left to fight the Vietnam War.
So the time that I was in the States, I was on my own. I mean, I wouldn't see him for 6 months. The longest time was a year. So I went through the pregnancies and all that time on my own. It was thinking about it now and locking myself into the flat at 5 or 6 o'clock at night with a gun, because he'd left me a gun. Those sorts of things, it was like being a little girl, abandoned all over again. It was a very lonely time and a very frightening time.
Not surprisingly, the marriage didn't last. At 21, she lost the 2 children in a custody battle that was traumatic.
It was. I was 21 when that happened, and at that stage I couldn't understand it. All I'd ever wanted to do was get married and have a daughter, really was what I wanted. That was my dream growing up, was to have a little girl. Men actually hadn't come into that at all. Somehow I was going to do this all on my own. And all of a sudden there I was. And in those days, of course, women didn't have the kinds of rights that they do now, or the powers that they do have now. He was a wealthy American, and he had money, he could fight, and he did. And yeah, I lost the children, and I had to live with that subsequently for years, carrying that around with me. I still haven't resolved it, and it's still difficult.
Mike returned to Auckland, lost and confused. This was the 60s, and her life was to be turned upside down by a chance meeting with poet James K. Baxter. At that time, Hemi, as he liked to be called, was leader of the commune at Jerusalem on the Wanganui River.
And then I was walking down Queen Street one day and into Vulcan Lane and saw this group of people, shabbily dressed people, and interesting looking people, I thought, because in those days I was still gloves and handbags and hats and things, you know, very proper. And yeah, and met Hemi in the middle of all of this, who put his arms around me, which I thought was an astounding thing for a stranger to do to another person, and looked me in the eye and said, "Why don't you come down, sister?" And it just sort of all just happened like that. It was like madness, absolute craziness. It just happened, and I knew I had to go.
Do you remember? Do you remember how the willows bent over the river and how we bathed naked under the sun in the cold brown waters down by the rapids? And the music from someone's guitar? And the fantails, a shot in the hills above, echoing down the valley, and our stomachs rumbling as we grew lean on freedom? Who remembers? Who remembers the old man and his clacking beads, his frightened hair? Who remembers the resurrection of the orgasm and Mauritanga? The worn leather belt, arguing with his baggy pants, always wanting to hit the dirt. We were called the Namokai, and we blessed them for it. All we wanted was a label we could wear. Remember? If you remember, friend, brother, sister, it was love we thought would win, would turn the world inside out. No hangovers, we shouted. Smoke dope, love, discover your roots, go back to the land. Middle-class Pakeha kids brought up under the mantle of the church and confession, the 7 deadlies and commandments had no show. Remember the marches, the banners and the war? We marked walls with symbols, and "Mother slept here" became a war cry. I never understood Vietnam. I understood the mongrel kid hot from Porirua, though, who broke every window we had and screamed.
Baxter created Jerusalem as a haven for alienated youth. The commune embodied his Catholic ideals of forgiveness, unconditional love and family, a powerful brew for a traumatized young Catholic full of guilt.
In a sense, it was the first time that I'd ever been loved unconditionally, because I recognised that I'm a difficult person. And that led me back to that sense of, well, if it was possible for these people to love me unconditionally, then perhaps it was possible for God to love me unconditionally too. And so I managed to get rid of some of that terrible fear and guilt, and the marriage and the children had really, you know, I was really suffering. And it was a family that I was part of. It was the Maori thing too was very, very important. The concept of aroha. Coming from a Pakeha, middle-class Pakeha background, it was like having a bucket of cold water thrown over you. Jesus, you know, people actually touching each other and embracing, laughing, telling dirty jokes and screaming, you know, roaring with laughter. And I was freed. And you saw these kids come with these drawn faces and tight and the eyes with no life in them. And you saw them transformed over a period of time. You saw it in action. Faith. There would be literally no food one day, and you'd be saying to yourself, God, you know, what are we going to eat? And somebody would arrive that day with just what you were wanting. People say, you know, well, that's crap. But it wasn't. It happened.
Mike and Hemi became lovers, but illness and the inner contradictions of a complex man finally drove her back to the city.
Lothario knew the tricks but lost his way in the dark, fumbling around curves and sentencing the silences. He was so careful he thought he'd die, and the fierce girl who'd craved a rager, who wanted pyrotechnics, not candles and stale incense, went wandering into the night, chatting up street cleaners and winking at drunks. I wandered around for many years after Jerusalem, literally without any sense of direction, not knowing what. I did a lot of writing. That was a time that was very rich for the writing. Now everyone has forgotten. No one walks up the road. You pay to see the old man's grave, you have a mortgage and some kids, and you don't understand them, and your women have been raped, and you feel to a large part as though you've been kicked in the balls.
Mike's 20s and 30s included a spell in jail for drug possession, a battle with the bottle, and another marriage, again to an older man. Then she discovered radio, and her third and current husband broadcaster John Blumsky, another man 20 years older than Mike.
Isn't that dreadful? Yeah, there's a gap in my life somewhere. I'm actually really not quite sure what it's like to go out with a younger man. But I quite like the mature types.
Well, the Freudians would have a field day and say they were father figures.
Yeah, of course they would. Well, I mean, a load of old rope.
Just like them?
I just like them, yeah. They've been there, they've done that. They don't have to prove anything. They've read all the good books. They listen to good music on the whole. They know who they are.
A satisfying relationship and a career in radio have given Mike a new security, but it's through her poetry that she comes to terms with her ghosts.
One morning I woke and told God to bugger off. I packed his bags and gave him a one-way ticket and a cut lunch. I swept the cave and lit a fire, invited some women to share a meal. We sang and told tales till dawn.
Mike's two published anthologies are deeply personal returns to her past, and she finds the process of writing hurts. The pain is both emotional and physical.
I'm never really sure whether I want to go through with it right to the end. Once it's done, it's a relief, but I quite often have quite serious physical side effects where I shake and I can get depressed. This is where I rely on my support systems. I don't know why it affects me quite like this, except, as I said, perhaps it's because I'm dragging things up out of me. It's been a kind of a catharsis. You know, whether it's valid to do that, whether it's literary in a sense to do that or not too is the question. You know, a lot of people say, you know, that it's not on. But for women who've been taught to smile with their mouths closed and things like that, you know, it's important for us now to feel as though we can open our mouths and... Some men have two, most at least one. If she's not someone's bondage, she's most likely a nun. I'd keep her and feed her if she'd just come and stay and massage my ego at the end of each day.
For Mike, the writing process is a kind of recurring illness.
It's the sort of nervousness that you get before you're perhaps going on stage or facing the public. Yeah, it's very much that physical. Sometimes I literally have to get up and go out and leave it. It can wreck my whole day, which is why when I'm working at Talkback and having to put a lot of energy into my program, I find it difficult to write because I have to make a cut-off point somewhere along the line at some point of the day and divorce myself from the writing. Otherwise, I can't function as a Talkback host at night when I'm supposed to be together, because up to that point I'm not together. You know, I'm in another world, a very highly charged emotional space.
Daily I plot my death. I dress rehearse the scene and have my lines off pat. I remember Sarah slept in a coffin and was not considered mad. I placed my wedding ring on my finger this morning, the third one, to remind me that once you've outplayed your drama, there's always someone ready to hand you another bloody script.
What to do? Have you ever felt a gentle touch?
Today, Mike has 2 dogs, a piano, and a steady relationship. She has a family of listeners, and she's won her battle with the bottle. So is Mike the Rager still alive?
No, dead and buried. She's those days have long gone. I'm a much quieter, calmer version of the. I'm the Mike Mark II now. Probably a bit dull. My body couldn't have stood it. I got very ill about 4 or 5 years ago, and radical changes had to be made to lifestyle. I have stabilising influences in my life now that I lacked all my earlier life. Since 1980, when I met my husband, things have been a lot more stable, and I've learned disciplines and
And you're settling into a comfortable middle age?
well, you know, I mean, there's always the possibility that I'll break out at one stage or another, but at the moment it's pretty comfortable, yeah.
And in one-roomed flats and Beasley homes, they sit in locked lavatories, scribbling fast and time to children. They write poems on tables littered with crumbs and jam to the beat of the AM band. They record the songs of all the women in the world, each one an image of her sister.
They also write books. Mike Minahan is currently working on a novel. And after Malcolm McNeil, what a lot of M's we've got on the program today. And we have more. M's for metal and for music. Ask a cross-section of the public what makes them cross, and many will say loud music. And they'll tell you that the loudest music comes from brass instruments. Instruments you won't be surprised to discover that are made and operated in the same way as the cannons of Sir Francis Drake and Lord Nelson. Yet no instrument is more personal. They come to life by what gives us life. They breathe as we breathe. Perhaps that's why we can forgive them their brazen stridency. Here now is a fond tribute to those instruments of huff, puff and blow. The tuba, the trumpet, the trombone, the French horn, all made with tender loving care at the Selma factory in the United States. Long may they reign.
Each brass instrument is built from start to finish here in the plant.
Selmer purchased Bach in 1961, we worked very closely with Vincent Bach, going over designs, and we had a real strict policy, and we do have, that we don't really mess with his designs. They're all blueprinted, and we check them very carefully with our engineering department to make sure that we're meeting the standards that he set back then.
He was obviously a remarkable individual. I first met him in September of 1960. He had a knowledge of acoustics and a knowledge of physics, plus the ability to play well, that I think was undoubtedly a unique combination in our industry. I don't think anybody's ever had that. And he put all that together, and he made the instruments that, of course, we now make. We've built on it, but we really built on it using his mandrels and his ideas and his drawings.
One of the interesting things to me is that an industry that is so wedded to convention, and by that I mean you work very hard to keep an instrument essentially the same as it was when it was first created. We are really answering the needs of the artist. And it's a wonderful marriage, and there are very few industries or operations of any kind that I know of where the person on the bench can literally identify so strongly with the end user and be a part of the finished product. It's, to my knowledge, one of the few, if not the only, handcrafted type industry still operating in the United States. We literally have generations of families working not only within our industry, but within our company.
My great-grandfather was in the industry, and he started back in early 1900s. He worked for a company in town here for 75 years, and he handed it down to his son, and on to my father, and then to myself, which is 4 generations now. You have to be able to know musicians, know their feelings, and like to work with brass and brass products, because that's basically what we do.
In one section, precision tools turn out the pistons and the valve casings. The valve casings are brass, while the pistons are Monel metal, which is a non-corrosive nickel alloy. The rotary valve of the French horn is made from solid brass. It's ground, hand-lapped, and fitted. All tension and stress among the moving parts is eliminated. The player needs effortless operation, sure response, and freedom of tone. The valve casings which will house the moving pistons are temporarily wired. Elbows are inserted into the valve casings. They are then silver soldered into a completed valve cluster. This cluster is dipped into a boiling solution to neutralize acids. another part of the plant, the bell blanks are scribed and cut. Brass is actually an alloy, generally 70% copper and 30% zinc, but there are other combinations used, such as copper and nickel. A material of higher copper content will produce a more mellow tone. The trumpet bell stems are formed one at a time over mandrels and the seams soldered. Some are student trumpets are two-piece bells with two seams, but the Bach bell is formed from a single sheet of brass to give finer resonance and tonal quality. The bell maker performs several operations to mold the bell. Finally, the bell is spun to give it the proper flair and temper. Different flare shapes produce different colors of sound. The wider the flare, the darker the sound. The more narrow the flare, the more brilliant the sound. A rim is added to the bell and a wire inserted to give the instrument strength and required tone quality. The trombone bell is built in a similar manner, as is the baritone horn and the French horn. The tuba requires a two-stage spinning process, beginning with the flare. It is flat spun and then trimmed. The center is removed for attachment to the tuba's bell stem. To prevent buckling of the fragile brass bell stem, during the critical bending process, Selmer employs two methods. In the freeze bending method used for trumpets and cornets, a solution is poured into the bell and then quick frozen to provide the required solid core. For the larger instruments, the flugelhorn and the French horns, pitch is poured into the bell. After the pitch has cooled, the flugelhorn stem can be formed around the mandrel. These processes allow both the interior and the exterior of the stem to hold its smooth, round shape. The bend of the French horn bell is measured with a template to a precise dimension. Freeze bending serves the same purpose for bending the trumpet. The instrument is trimmed to a prescribed length and placed on a holding truck for the frozen solution to melt. In the case of pitch, the bell is heated and the pitch softens. In another part of the plant, the instruments are mounted, but this is not an assembly line process. Each employee has the responsibility for taking the bell, the valve casings, the lead pipe, the slides, and mounting them into an instrument. These instruments are now ready for the next step, buffing. During buffing, a red rouge compound is applied to the buffing wheel to achieve the high luster finish.
So when I first started here in '63, I think it was, I was a buffer and I buffed horns in the finishing room there for about 22 years. It's hard work. Some of them guys are making good money, but they earn every penny of it because it is a dirty, hard job, and it's just takes a special breed of person to go in there and work in that buffing room because it's a tough job. You fight the machine all day long, and you got to be in good shape. Some of the machines turn at 3,200 RPMs, and that's just like a rifle bullet coming out. I mean, it can throw that horn back at you just like that, and you can get seriously injured from it. But it's a good living. It's a good living.
The instruments are immersed in a cleaning solution to remove all particles of dirt and grease from the buffing and handling. Protective lacquer is sprayed on each instrument. The final assembly consists of attaching the small components such as the trombone trigger mechanism, valve guides, valve caps. The pistons are hand-lapped and fitted. The slides inserted. And the instrument is tested.
Almost all of the jobs require a good year to go on piecework, okay? And probably 5 years to really become good at it. I've always had an interest in art. I've taken art courses on the outside and art in school and things like that. So I always liked a job that required precision.
Sherry Huntley is Selmer's principal engraver.
When you see your instruments on advertisements through the music companies in the area, it gives you great satisfaction knowing that you were part of that process.
Well, the most important thing is to let the instrument sell itself. I mean, you can put something in front of somebody and say, isn't this a pretty trumpet? But the proof really comes out when they begin to play it. The instrument as a tool lets them express what's in their soul or what's in their heart, what they're trying to say.
The demand for the Bach instrument, or the demand for a professional instrument, has grown. The ability to do new things, to get new sounds, I think has grown. The musician has asked for more out of the instrument. And of course, we've been very fortunate in being able to respond to those demands, mainly because of what Vincent did in the very beginning.
There, a veritable hard castle of brass. And that's all from us this Sunday. Next week we bring you a special report, an event that could take wearable art from the paddocks of Nelson to the catwalks of Paris.
You don't have to be a specialist designer, an engineer, a colour coordinate person, you can just enter.
Next. And we've results from our Shakespeare Spot the Title contest. And one more thing, Last Night at the Proms is on Television 1 tonight at 9:35. Here's a preview. It's just a little from the Proms tonight on Television 1. And we'll be back with Sunday.